Okay, thank y'all. We'll start now. Good evening, everyone. Thank y'all for being here and joining us tonight. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge that we are standing on Kalapuya land here at the University of Oregon. I also want to invite y'all, ooh, or not. Sorry for, there you go. Sorry about that, y'all. And I would like to invite y'all to research what land you're residing on here and whatever you call home. With that, we have some small announcements, so bear with me, they're a little long. With that, we ask that you keep your mask on at all times, unless you're eating, of course. If you feel comfortable eating here, we ask that once you're done, you put your mask back on. And also, if you don't feel comfortable eating here, you can totally take away home your lunchbox. And let's see, single-use bathrooms are right down to the left, and gendered restrooms are right down by the gallery. Let's see, what else is there? We'd also like to thank AEC for ASL interpretation today. And another announcement is that the B team is hiring for outreach, and we will also start hiring during the spring for all positions. So if any of y'all know or want a job with the B team, y'all should totally look into it. I love this position, and I feel like all my team does too. So yeah, you can go on to Instagram or Engage. Also, Handshake, I believe, has all our position listings. Or email the SABBE at uoregon.edu for more information. Let's see, what else is there? We'd also love also to announce that there are some surveys on the table for y'all to fill those out, as well as our little handouts for our spring term speakers with our whole B lineup. So I encourage you to join us for those on spring term. We would love to see you here. Let's see, what else? Lastly, I would also love to give a shout out to the Women's Center. They're holding the Lily B. Parker Black, Indigenous, and Women of Color Speaker Series with co-creator of the hashtag Black Lives Matter, Alicia Garza, here on March 2nd in the EMU Ballroom. So if y'all want more information on that, you should go follow them on their Instagram at UO_Women's Center for more information. Lastly, we also noticed that there are some J students here from our Reporting 1 class. So if y'all have questions for the B team, we'll be holding 10 minutes after that. We love to have you here. So we'll be holding after the event 10 minutes for you to ask us any questions you may have. So we would love if you could hold those for after the event. So now to the good part and what y'all came here for. I'd like to introduce Khalil from the National Association of Black Journalists and with the Black Male Alliance, as well as Samaritan for the Black Male Alliance, and Amir, the director of the National Association of Black Journalists. They will be coming up here and giving you all some announcements, and Khalil will be introducing our speaker for tonight, Drake Hills, as well as facilitating the Q&A with them. So if y'all would help me and welcome them to the stage.
Want me to go first? Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Amir Safadi. As she introduced me, I am the director of UO-NEBJ in the journalism school. UO-NEBJ is a collection of motivated students from all backgrounds and majors who come together every Tuesday from 6 to 7 p.m. In Allen Hall 130 to create and collaborate on multimedia projects. And all that content is curated on wethecookout.com. Every Black History Month, we put all the amazing projects together that we've worked on this year and curate them onto the website. But and this year, we are dropping those projects this Friday on February 25th. But in the meantime, be sure to go on to wethecookout.com and check out the passion projects of the past, because there's definitely a lot of great work on there from past students. Just like she said about the B series, we are certainly recruiting a new generation of creators. Of course, with spring term coming up, seniors graduating, we definitely want to, keep We the Cookout cooking. So I definitely want to put that out there that all interested members should definitely come to Allen Hall 130 from 6 to 7 p.m. Every Tuesday. No application required, and again, all backgrounds, all majors. We all have a perspective, and I'd like to hear all of you. So, thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, I don't know how to use a microphone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Samaritan Kundin. I'm a fourth-year student here at the University of Oregon, and I'm one of three co-directors. For the Black Male Alliance. BMA essentially is a student organization dedicated to providing a safe space for Black male students here at the University of Oregon to pursue leadership, professional, and academic skills, while at the same time providing a community for fellowship and just a safe place to kick it. We usually meet on Mondays from 6 to 7 at the Black Cultural Center. However, this term and last term, we've made an effort to meet in a variety of different places on campus to introduce our first and second years to new parts of campus. If you'd like to learn more about future events from spring term and beyond, feel free to follow us on Instagram at UO_BMA. And if you'd like to be added to our email listserv, email us at uobma3@gmail.com. Other than that, you can learn more about other Black student organizations like the Black Women of Achievement and Black Student Union by following us and looking for them as well. Thank you to the B Series for providing us this opportunity to promote our organizations here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excuse me. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's speaker, Drake Hills, has done profound work leading important media coverage on the Black Players for Change Coalition in the MLS for USA Today. Tonight, he will be discussing how sports can be a vehicle for advancing the status quo of race, culture, and society. And it is my pleasure, as he is one of the people who brought me into the school and into BMA, it is my pleasure to welcome the San Diego native, University of Oregon SOJC class of 2018 graduate, Northwestern University Master of Science and Journalism, and current Tennessean sports reporter and journalist Drake Hills to the stage.
How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you. Yeah, come on, keep it up, come on. Hype me up a little bit. Jeez. Before I get started, as I mentioned, my name is Drake Hills, and before I want to go into my presentation, I do want to acknowledge, just as Annette did, that we are standing on Kalapuya land, and I want to pay respects to the indigenous and Native American people in which this land belongs to. Secondly, I want to thank God for bringing me here, the one who my blessings flow from. So I want to give thanks to my Lord for bringing me back to my alma mater and getting a chance to speak with you all this evening. I also want to shout out all the B Series representatives, the B team, as they like to be called. I want to thank you, Annette Rodriguez-Rojas, as well as Jaleesa, where's Jaleesa? Silva Ramirez over there. And also Suzanne Hanlon. Thank you so much for inviting me to not only speak about what I'm passionate about, but my background. And I also want to shout out Valerie Simon as well. As you see everything on the UOB series, Valerie is the one that is making the magic happen. So I want to appreciate Valerie for what Valerie does. All right, so let's get started. As you can see, that's not me, by the way. I'm a little more light-skinned than him. B Sports. B Sports, I also want to acknowledge why I chose B Sports. B Sports is short for belonging in sports, belonging in the environment that I enter, whether that be a press box, whether that be out at a stadium, whether that be in the newsroom, and I'll get to the reason why I chose B Series. And it's a reason to talk about what exactly I'm passionate about. Why am I in sports? Why am I a sports journalist? Why did the Black Male Alliance, did the Black Student Task Force, my chance to talk about soccer with GoDucks.com and to write for GoDucks.com, as well as do some work for KWVA, the local campus radio station here. So let's get started. All right, so as many of the freshmen, listen, I know that a lot of you guys have gone in and then matriculated through the UO during the pandemic, so I'm not quite sure how introduction has worked, but at least for me, as one who transferred into the University of Oregon, I'm gonna introduce myself as we used to. So yes, as Khalil mentioned, I am a 2018 graduate of the University of Oregon, and I took many classes. I see many of my instructors here tonight. Charlie Butler is one. I see Brent Walth as well. And then, I think with Oregon, what I did was I transferred in. I came in as a junior college student. So I want to encourage those, if you know about junior colleges, if you've been to a junior college, that you can make it to where I am now. I started as a freshman, and I transferred in for the fall term of 2015. And next thing you know, I left with a cap and gown at the University of Oregon in 2018. And of course, as you see, and as Khalil mentioned, I went on to Northwestern University. In fact, the day of my graduation was a quick day. As soon as I got my cap and gown, I threw it up in the air, I got on a plane, and I started class the next day at Northwestern University. I don't recommend that, by the way, don't do that. So there, the Master of Science in Journalism program gave me the opportunity to flex my network, to be able to grow it and to focus on 3 C's, as you might have seen on the UOB series Instagram: confidence, character, and connections. The character is how I have branded myself as a reporter. The character is how I've branded myself as a Black man in the sports media landscape. The confidence is someone in my identity as those tags that I just mentioned. How can I use that? How can I be confident in myself? As I'll talk to you about later, is how can I use that to propel myself forward? How can I not be discouraged by the lack of representation in those press boxes that I mentioned and do my job and excel at my job? And the connections, of course, how can I build my network to get where I want to go? How can I become a soccer reporter, which is something that not many have the opportunity to be. All right, so I'm gonna explain my chapters here. So long before I came to Oregon, I'm aging myself clearly here. As you see, I'm a 96 born. I was born in San Diego and raised majority of my life in San Diego, but spent some time in Georgia. I like to say that I'm a Southerner or a San Diegan with Southerner ties. That is due to the fact that, I grew up in a Southern household. My mom's from Georgia. My dad grew up on a farm in Louisiana, but they decided to ball out, Black excellence, and moved to the sunny city of San Diego. And that's where I grew up. That's where I learned about soccer. I got a chance to play at the parks, to play in the local leagues, and get a chance to experience the first sport that I ever played. And as I grew older, I started to grow this passion for wanting to see other Black players that look like myself, both men and women. So to seeing the Kobe Jones, the Eddie Popes, but also the Brianna Scurrys, the Shannon Boxes, get a chance to see those amazing Black athletes represent their country over the U.S. men's and U.S. women's national team. Once I got to high school, I no longer was someone who played soccer. I was primarily a basketball player. But I learned something my junior year, and that's what you'll see here in 2013. Long story short, there became a time where I got pulled out of class one day in history, and I got pulled into the athletic director's office. He said, Drake, I have to tell you something. I don't think you're going to be able to play basketball anymore. We're going to have to suspend you because CIF, the Scholastic Athletic Association that oversees sports in California, has deemed you ineligible because of your double transfer, how you transferred and left our school and then came back a second time. And so because of that, the football that you've been playing and the basketball that you've been playing, those games are now forfeited. I come from a high school, Cathedral Catholic High School in San Diego, that is very well known for its athletics, both in football, but also in track and field. Girls soccer is a very high-level athletic-based school. And little did I know that that was going to be on the news the very next day. So here I am, 16 years old, and next thing you know, there are cameras from Channel 5, Fox, and NBC, and they've got me on the TV talking about this one kid has just ruined victories for the entire football team who was bound to win a CIF San Diego section championship. And so that began this storm that I mentioned, where what I've identified myself, when we talk about belonging, when we talk about my identity, I was an athlete. I struggled in school. I wasn't much of a scholar. As a matter of fact, I think who I am to many of my instructors here at Oregon, they saw me in high school back there. That can't be Drake. He's lazy. He's all about his Instagram and his Facebook and his MySpace, and yes, I said MySpace. And he wasn't somebody who was balanced. He didn't have an understanding of who he was, his identity, that was more than just an athlete. And so I began this storm of going through life without the true thing that I identified with, which was sports. I was simply just a young man who really didn't know who he was, and I began to question my relevance. What am I doing here? What's the point of my life? And I struggled with that. So after a couple of conversations, I had a couple of doctor's appointments, and they diagnosed me. They said, Drake, you've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And I didn't really understand what that was. And at that point, I started to really ask myself, okay, what exactly do I love to do? I was forced to. I didn't have a choice. So at the end of that, once I got into my senior year, after I decided to move to Atlanta, was bounced back, came back to San Diego for my senior year of high school, just in the span of 6 months. And I began this learning process to discover, okay, how can I express myself in ways that basketball didn't allow me to do? And so to bring it full circle, when you talk about Drake Hills, the writer, my writing started as a senior in high school, writing an assignment in British literature class, 12th grade, Mrs. Deborah Chapman. And Mrs. Chapman said, Drake, you're a creative writer. You have a great imagination. But I think we need to work on your organization. We need to work on your mechanics. But I think you show promise. I think you have a great skill set. And at that point, if it wasn't for Mrs. Chapman, I don't quite know if I would be here. Someone who is a journalist, an alumni who represents the University of Oregon, who represents Northwestern University, who writes for the USA Today, who covers Major League Soccer, the U.S. men's national team, the NFL, the NHL, you name it. So I want to thank you to Mrs. Deborah Chapman, but also to my parents, two black educated individuals, both with MBA degrees, two individuals who decided to put their son first when, and oftentimes didn't quite care about himself. And I think that's something that we as young people need to, and when I say young people, all y'all young, all y'all. So everybody here, I think it's important to recognize those who have invested in you. Those were my parents, and when I got to Oregon, as I've shouted out, many instructors invested in me. And as I've gone on, many others have invested in me as well. So that's how I got from 2013 into 2015, and when I came here to the University of Oregon, I found this group that one, Christina Jackson, she used to be a part of the CMAE. She was a retention specialist for black students. She said, Drake, you know, there's a group called the Black Male Alliance. It's about a year old, and AJ Dixon is the co-director. I came to find out that Kenneth Gamalo and DeMonte Jamison founded this program as the Men of Color program, but long story short, I went from just a general member sitting in the seats at Carson Hall to becoming a co-director in the span of 6 months. And it wasn't necessarily about the title, it was the fact that I wanted to belong. I wanted to be a part of something that reminded me of what it was like to be on that team, to express my talents, not just as a writer, you know, to be the one that represents, you know, secretary roles, social media, things of that sort, but to also grow those extra levels of the identity that we're talking about. And so I became a co-director for the Black Male Alliance. And shortly thereafter, I joined, it was elected to the Black Student Task Force shortly after its assembly in 2016. And then, as I grew in my writing, I joined KWVA Sports and started to cover men's basketball. I started to cover women's basketball. I covered softball. I did anything they asked because I was hungry. And then once I got to my senior year, I covered the Oregon women's soccer team for GoDucks.com, which was thanks to, again, the people that invested in me, those in the Division of Equity and Inclusion, and also my friends across campus. I was introduced to the athletic directors and the staff at the Department of Athletics. And so I was able to be a beat writer, which is something that I knew I needed. And thanks to them, I was able to create a role for myself. And so in 2019, after I graduated from Oregon and then eventually Northwestern, I took a journalism fellowship at the Arizona Republic, which is a newspaper, the largest paper in the state of Arizona. And there, I learned how to express my talents and how to hone my craft as a reporter. And there I started to cover the Phoenix Rising, which was a second-tier soccer team. I covered the Arizona Cardinals. I covered even some NASCAR. And yes, I was the only black person there. But listen, NASCAR has a lot of great stories. You can find stories anywhere. And that was something that I cherished, was getting a chance to tell great stories and to show exactly who I am. This might be a surprise to some, but I'm going to take you guys back to show you the epitome of what I was and who I was. And as you can see, there's 3 of us up there. That is the staff of the Black Male Alliance between 2016 and 2018. So you see, that's me on the right wearing some not-so-real glasses. And then in the middle, you'll see Chris Holloway. And on the left, that is August Jefferson. We were the co-directors of the BMA. And so in February 2017, I want to shout out Charlie Litchfield and the University of Oregon staff that created this video. And what we did was we were truly educating the campus of the University of Oregon about what it is to be black on the University of Oregon campus, but also what about Black History Month should be told and what it means to us. So I want to shout out Chris, who's in the crowd tonight. I want to shout out August as well for being able to show what the University of Oregon Black Male Alliance is all about. So let's play this.
Is meant at least for me, as a challenge to look back on our past and see the greatness that has been preceded before us and wonder how can we improve, how can we make strides to get better in the future.
Have you talked any about what alternatives are if the demands aren't fulfilled?
No, there's no alternative to these demands. There's no alternative. These are basic demands that people have to have in order to survive in a society.
I think that there's definitely been a sense of underclassmen wanting to be part of a change. There's more so a sense of, I see this problem here, and I would like to be a part of the change of that problem, and not, I see this problem here and I want to avoid.
Come here and be a change, be something that's important in this university. You have the talents, you need to use them. This is a space for you to grow within your community, to learn more about yourself, but also be a leader.
From being a part of Black Student Union, I got exposed to other people. There's Black culture, but I also got to see the complexity within Black culture.
I would be confused without the Black Male Alliance. The Black Male Alliance is a sense of organization, it's a sense of guidance, it's a sense of support for all of our students and all of our staff.
Dr. King wanted people of all color, race, and nationality to unite as one. People from all walks of life coming together as one for the good of all.
People often, think that we are living in this moment where we no longer need things like a Black History Month or, Asian American Heritage Month or Latino Heritage Month. I would say we continue to need Black History Month to kind of flesh out the histories and experiences and show the cultural contributions of, Africans in America.
Because if you don't know your history, you don't know where you come from, then you don't know where you're going.
All right. Well, thanks for Chris for leaving us with that punchline right there. Appreciate you, big fella. That is, in essence, of who I was as a student on the University of Oregon. And shortly thereafter, I began this journey where, if you take a look, starting with that top left story, I went down and graduated early at the University of Oregon. I finished my winter term, and I went back home. And thanks to Charlie, who knew someone, a columnist at the San Diego Union Tribune, I was able to start my career as a freelancer before I even stepped foot back on Oregon to get my cap and gown. I started freelancing. Yes, I was getting paid cash money. But the point is that I was able to get my reps. And that's an important thing. When you start talking about storytelling, the confidence that I mentioned, it comes with repetition. It comes with fleshing out those bad habits and getting into good ones. And so I started to find stories that not only were important to tell, but were an essence of who I was. And I think Sheila Burrell, a two-time Olympian as a heptathlete in the 2000 games and 2004 Olympic Games, was someone who exhibited the Black power that I felt that I did, but also to take what she learned at the Olympic Games and take what she learned as a professional athlete and brought it back to her community. And so I started this journey of telling some stories that I thought really resonated not just with me, but with my community. And as you go to the far right, upper right, that's during my time in Phoenix at the Arizona Republic in AC Central. And Solomon Asante was exactly who I thought I was, just in a journalism format. Solo is someone who is about providing for his family, honoring his family, and also doing by any means necessary to get to the top. And so as you go down to the far left, Sarah Houston was, if not the only, one of the very few women driving on the NASCAR circuit. She's driven in the truck series, she's driven in light mods and other different divisions inside NASCAR. Now she's working for one of the racing teams that are a part of NASCAR. And on that bottom right there, that is me interviewing the commissioner of Major League Soccer. And before 1996, if you watched the Super Bowl, he was the reason why the Super Bowl was the way it was. So Mr. Don Garber there really started my chapter as a reporter for the Tennessean and the USA Today Network, and that started basically where I am today as a Tennessean reporter covering Nashville SC and Major League Soccer. So I want to get into the essence of, when I talk about B Sports and using sports as a vehicle for race, culture, and society. I want to ask this question, why are black storytellers important? Not just in sports, but in general. And for me, I have 3 points. Historical precedents, understanding the plight of black athletes, men and women, boys and girls, in the system, in leagues, in the universities, in the youth and the grassroots, understanding what is the life of the black athlete. Number 2 is the celebration or the empathy. What do I mean by celebration? Celebration is the jubilee that comes with the athlete, the man, the woman that has broken barriers, the Jackie Robinsons, the Bill Russells, but also, if we go even further, the globalization of sport, Michael Jordan, right? Pele, George Weah, who's the only African or black individual to ever win the FIFA Ballon d'Or, which is awarded to the best soccer player in the world. He is the only black player to ever win that award. He's now also the president of Liberia, so shout out to any Liberians in the world, in this room. But George Weah, all the way up to Bill Russell, understanding what it's like, how can we celebrate these individuals, but also the empathy of the black athlete, the black subject in sports. How can we understand their plight? And as we tell their stories, as we get a chance to humanize these individuals, when we look at them, when we ask them questions, how can we get them to trust us as storytellers? How can we get them to get comfortable, understand their struggle, and be able to tell that story in a way that affects and resonates with everyone, not just your readers, but even the athletes themselves. And third is the vision, knowing where black athletes, knowing where black people are going, not just in sports, but also in music, in arts and culture, in news, in politics, in business, understanding. Listen, there is always going to be a first of everything, at least in our generation. And so we have to understand the importance of how can that individual get there, how can we get there, and what is the importance of telling that story to share for everyone. As you've mentioned here, as I've seen, and if you look at the number that is in that story that I wrote just after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, I talked about the effect of black individuals in particular spaces where they are one of few or the only. The traumatic effect of lifelong exclusion for black American society. Now, as you see right there, that number, I'm one of 5 black newspaper writers covering Major League Soccer across America, and I'm reminded daily of its thin precedent of blackness. That number has decreased since I wrote that. I'm now one of 3. Now, why is that important? When you start talking about the Black Players for Change Coalition, you start talking about the Black Women's Players Collective, in soccer where so much is growing, right? The national team, as I'll get to later, is evolving. And talking about the black individuals and why, let's say, there's only one black coach in Major League Soccer right now. Why is there only one black president for a Major League Soccer club right now? Who is asking those questions? Who is the one to answer those questions? How can we get a chance to tell that story? Who is going to tell that story? That's the importance of representation in media, and that's what drives me when we talk about who I am and who exactly I represent. That's why I do it. So I mentioned the Black Players for Change, and this is basically an example of a story that I wrote on Juneteenth, 2021. So Juneteenth 2020, Black Players for Change was a coalition that was founded by Major League Soccer players to assemble to advance the reality of black coaches, players, and staff in soccer. And it started with Justin Morrow and Quincy Amarikwa. And what they did was they started making action, right? So they brought in the National Black Bank Foundation. They brought the Men of Color program. They brought the 100 Black Men. They brought in Adidas, and they started building soccer courts and mini pitches in urban neighborhoods, in black neighborhoods, brown neighborhoods. And they started focus on representation. They started focusing on access. And I thought it was important, as someone who knows what it's like not to be one of the many, to reflect that and to show them how important that is. And one thing I wanted to mention, why is it important for there to be black reporters in soccer, but also in journalism? When we talk about empathy, this is Kai Kamara on the left. Kai is a man of 14 years in Major League Soccer, and in those 14 years, he's become the 5th all-time leading goal scorer ever. And Kai is an individual that has been a part of Black Players for Change. And just after it was founded, in June 2020, I spoke with Kai. And what I did was I resonated with him. I said, Kai, I remember the first time that I got stopped by police, not driving, but stopped on the street. And I was in high school. And there was a neighbor in the neighborhood that I was walking through that thought that I threw a rock at his house. Something silly, right? The police didn't know that. And of course, I'm grateful that I'm still here. I'm grateful that it was taken care of. But I remember the angst that comes with police approaching me as a black man, or the lights shining in your rearview mirror, the red and blue lights as you're driving. And so I spoke with Kai in a way that was vulnerable. And in response, this is what he told me. He told me about this demonstration as a member of Colorado Rapids in 2020. And he himself and his son, he was 4 years old, I believe. And he says, the next minute, my son Kendrick, without anybody telling him, laid down next to me. Kamara, who was black, told the Tennessean. I started crying, just thinking to myself, I pray that you never get in this position, whether you being a bad person growing up or just being judged differently. Having a black kid in America is very scary. And Kai went on to talk about what it's like, despite him being a 14-year veteran in the league, being famous, playing for multiple clubs in Major League Soccer, Columbus, Minnesota, Colorado. He's even played internationally. He represents the Sierra Leone national team. But yet, when he's driving in America, he still has that fear. When he's around people, he might still get that fear. And so when we talk about Kai's experience, not just in America, but throughout the world, we have to ask ourselves, how can that be tied in to each other? And that's where diaspora comes in. And so when we talk about race, culture, and society, diaspora is living in all of those, right? How does it live in race? We talk about the black representation in America, African Americans, black Americans, and their existence in this country. But we also talk about the Caribbean and how the Caribbean has essentially been the feeder for many European nations. And we talk about the national teams that represent them. So if you see, starting in Europe, some of the best national teams in the world historically, when we talk about France, England, Netherlands, Germany, France being a team that recently won the last World Cup in 2018. I believe 18 players had come from African or Caribbean nations, whether first generation or second generation. Same thing goes for the Netherlands. I'll skip to them. When we talk about players like Patrick Kluivert and Clarence Seedorf, Clarence, both him and Patrick, represent Suriname in the Caribbean. What about the United States? As I mentioned, the Kobe Jones, the Eddie Popes, the Brianna Scurries, the Kim Crabs, the Tony Sanes. These are black individuals that have represented the U.S. men's national team, but where's the narrative? And that's what drives me. That's what motivates me as a soccer storyteller, is to be sure that these foundational pieces that have brought soccer to the black community continue to get the attention, continue to get the respect, and also the attention, how they got there and how close and how tough it was. The two first black players in U.S. soccer, as I mentioned, Kim Crabb being on the women's side, and then you have Jimmy Banks and Desmond Armstrong, two of the first black players to ever play for the U.S. men's national team. And then, of course, in Western Africa, on the homeland, we have players, as I mentioned, in George Weah. Currently, you have the Sadio Manes, these players that are playing in England, playing in Europe, and some of them even playing in the U.S. They all have the same experience in a way that ties back to them as a member of the African diaspora, yet they have a different season about them. And I think for black storytellers, it's important for us to know how to differentiate their experiences, but also relate to them and say, look, your experience playing in England, but are representative of your country in Cameroon or in Liberia or in Nigeria or in Ghana, right? It's kind of similar to Thierry Henry or a Patrick Kluivert or an Eddie Pope, even though they're from different parts of the world, but yet they still share that same black experience. That brings me to my dream. Now, why am I a storyteller? Why do I believe that I can still do this, that I can rise to covering a World Cup, that I can rise to covering the U.S. men's national team, to be the voice for black people who are almost infatuated with this new sport that maybe is a little bit different than the NBA. It's a little bit different than the NFL. To feature an enterprise stories that I'm talking about, the Black Players for Change, the Kai Kamaros of the world, how can I continue to tell those stories on a regular basis that not only represent the plight of black people, but also amplify themselves in their own respective sports, not just soccer, but also to connect the diaspora, as I mentioned, and whether that be in soccer, whether that be in American soccer, whether that be in European soccer, I think it's important for us to advance the status quo, to advance what we think as soccer in this culture, right? We talk about black culture. How many of you got a chance to access soccer in a way that you saw, whether it's a black woman or a black man, excel in the sport and inspired you to play that sport? There's a reason why a lot of black people choose the basketball, choose the football, choose track, maybe even choose baseball. It's access, but also representation. And to take those two and pin them not only just with the people in their community, but who they see on TV, who they see in the newspaper, who they see on social media. And so my desire, my dream, is to be the connector between that young black girl, that young black boy who is 5 or 6 years old and says, whoa, that black girl right there, that black woman, she's doing what? She's winning the World Cup? Wow, I want to be like her. And so when we talk about the Tony Sanes, the Eddie Popes, as you see up in the top two right there, number 23 in the middle, that's Eddie Pope. He's one of the best defenders of all time in the U.S. men's national team. He is now the director of Octagon Soccer, which is a soccer agency. Then you have Tony Sane, who's doing exactly what I'm talking about, bringing representation, bringing access to the communities, particularly based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and bringing soccer courts, bringing supplies to black communities. And then, as you see at the bottom, that's DeMarcus Beasley. He's also one of the highest, most capped U.S. men's national team players in history. And you see there's just 3 black men playing for the U.S. men's national team. This picture was taken during the summer of 2002, in 2002 FIFA World Cup. And then, here's where we are now. As you can see the difference. As I mentioned, George Weah, his son, Tim Weah at the far left, at the top. And now he's playing for the U.S. As you can go down, Yunus Musa, number 6, number 8, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, DeAndre Yedlin, and then above DeAndre, the number 2 jersey, you have Anthony Robinson. And if you to his left, number 12, just in the middle center, that's Miles Robinson. Now, I don't know about you, but I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the starting 11 in less than 20 years. So who's going to tell their story, right? And so my dream is to be sure that maybe the next Weston McKinney, the next Tyler Adams, the next Tim Weah will have the story to read to show them that, they belong too, just as I do. Thank you.
So at this time, we will be having our Q&A section where I will be leading Drake with some questions, and yeah, we'll have a little bit of a conversation.
Sorry, man, I was a little thirsty.
No, absolutely. It was. Once again, give it up for Drake Hills coming out tonight. All right, Drake. Tonight you talked about your experience with coming to the University of Oregon and needing to find community, kind of led with that. And what is some of the experience that you felt first coming to campus, and then what kind of helped you break that mold, and what mindset did you get to, all right, I'm gonna go out and take advantage of this massive university and all that it has to offer, whether I can see it or not?
All right, so the first part of that question was, you might want to turn that one off. The first part of that question, I believe, was about attacking the university, being able to come here and to say, okay, this is what I want to do and this is how I'm going to do it. And I think it's important to reemphasize how valuable the Black Male Alliance was for me. It was a reminder through other general members, through other, not just students, but staff as well. We had a young man who was our advisor. His name was Will Hatchett. And to see Will represent what it's like to have been a little bit further along than I was, to see him guide us and talk to us about the Black male experience, especially on a college campus. I spoke with him about not just how I can lead BMA, but how I can balance that with what I want to do. And there's other individuals as well, and other journalists that I reached out to talk with about how can I maneuver as a college student through the ranks to get where I want to go. How can I, what do I need to do how can I pitch a story? What do I say to an editor? What does an editor look for when he sees a freelancer? Email him. What is he looking for? What are the key words? And I mixed those things up because it wasn't just one thing. I think it was a multitude of support and advising, but also teaching and learning from what my instructors taught me. As I mentioned, Brent Walth is in the stands here, Charlie Butler, Damian Radcliffe, Peter Laufer, Lisa Hayamoto. They all pitched in, and they contributed something to me, and I took away something that gave me the confidence to go forward.
Talk about how important that networking was and sharing yourself, because obviously when you go out, you leave your apartment, you leave your home, or whatever the case may be, you're sharing yourself every time, and kind of like that mindset going into that.
Yeah, I wore it, literally. Like every time I stepped outside, I think more times than not, I think members of BMA will tell you, I wore more soccer stuff than anybody probably on this campus. You heard that, right? Soccer jerseys, soccer jackets, soccer everything. You know, without even saying a word, there was a sense of relation. If somebody recognized a FC Bayern Munich jersey or a U.S. men's national team jersey or a jacket, oh, you know, and that created a conversation, almost like an elevator pitch to share who I was and to talk about my craft. And so every single time I represented myself, every single time I attempted to network, I made sure that I lived it every day, not just in the classroom, but with BMA, going out on the weekends, everything. Everything was about soccer, just so I could be sure that I was on point, just in case I run into somebody with the registered guard or, you know, if an instructor and has a connect, they'll think, oh, I know that one soccer guy in my class, and boom, boom, boom. And that's how that happens. So yeah, I think it was pretty straightforward with me because I followed my heart, I followed what I was passionate about.
And I want to go back to that. You talked about building your brand and building that vision for yourself or how you were going to be when you went out. Just talk about that. Was that something that you came just across one day, you know, in the mirror, like, this is how I'm going to be? Was that a conscious decision? Was it just something that you found yourself molding into? Or talk about building your personal brand and, you know, your signature, if you will.
Yeah, so for me, you know, when I talked about that storm earlier, that was one of the products that came out of that, was asking myself, okay, what brings me joy? Because I'm down right now. You know, I'm in this storm. I'm very confused about what exactly I am and who exactly I am. And I remember that first sport that gave me that joy, the first sport I ever played, before basketball, before American football, before track. You know, what was the sport that felt like it was me? And so I started watching more, but I didn't just watch. I started to look into the linguistics and look into the sociology, the diaspora, the things that in soccer, it was almost like a textbook for me. So when I watched soccer, when I consumed the sport, it wasn't just to see what the score was at the end. It was to see, okay, that's a different player that I haven't seen before. That's a different league that I haven't watched before. Okay, let me go figure out who they are. Okay, what's their story? And that developed into this craze, this obsession with wanting to basically introduce to anyone who was willing to listen more about me, more about who this player is, more about blackness and the intersection of blackness, sport, culture, and society in a way that maybe they understood when they, let's say they consume The Uninterrupted or ESPN's The Undefeated, and they learn more about LeBron, they learn more about Kevin Durant, they learn more about Odell Beckham Jr. In a way that was more than just who they were as athletes. And I wanted to do the same, but just with the sport of soccer.
And going into your journey and path through journalism and writing and finding your creative voice through writing, talk about that. And is there a connection or disconnection between you, the athlete, because I feel like if you're an athlete once, you're an athlete for life. Talk about you, the athlete or sports fan, and you, the journalist and storyteller. And how does that go into or affect your writing?
Wear your mask, everybody. Yeah, well, so the understanding of the athlete, right? When we talked about empathy, I basically articulated it in a way that was catered to just the black individual, but I think there's empathy in knowing what the athlete, not just the black athlete, but athletes in general go through. And so yes, that is a part of basically the word choice and how I can tell a story and what I actually say. But in terms of how I craft stories, I think it's something that you have to continue to practice, and I think it's more of creation and the creativity that I mentioned earlier. using your imagination, but also the color to paint a picture for an audience who probably, may have never been to a game before, or may just be stumbling upon your story but have no idea anything about soccer. How can I please them, but also please the one passionate soccer supporter or fan, or whoever they are? How can I have that balance? And that's something that at the Tennessean has been something that I've honed in on. And so when you talk about like basically crafting a story, I think it goes two ways. So.
And obviously, you haven't always been a sports journalist, so what were some other ways, and we have obviously journalism students here, what were some ways that writing about different topics, or what were some different topics that you wrote about and found yourself interested in that helped your main focus, or, maybe even provided different focus in areas that helped you as a writer and an interviewer and storyteller in general?
I think ultimately it comes down to me covering HBCUs. Someone who is a black writer who obviously emphasizes that. I'm proud of that. Where can I go to sit across somebody who knows what it's like to be in athletics, to be in sports, to take pride in that, but always have something that's in sports that means a little bit more to them? Being in Nashville right now, where I have two of the more storied HBCUs, one being Fisk University. A few months back, or a few weeks, I should say, I got a chance to talk to the AD about being the first HBCU to have a intercollegiate women's gymnastics program. And for some sports homer out there who might all be about football and be about basketball, they'll think there's nothing about that. But I understand the precedence. And I understand how important that is for black girls to see, wow, I can go to Fisk and continue being in gymnastics and then maybe one day reach the Olympics. But in that, I'm sitting in a ballroom a little bit smaller than this. And for those who are big fans of basketball, you might know who Kenny Anderson is. Kenny Anderson is one of the best point guards ever played in the NBA. He's also the head men's basketball coach at Fisk right now. So to brush shoulders with icons, with people who stand for something more than just the sport that they play, I think HBCUs is a great place to go.
I wanted to go into one of the stories that you wrote. Massive story for USA Today. Congratulations on getting the story, and I felt like you did a wonderful job with it. But what was the tone of the Black Players Coalition, around that time of mid-2020, and how did the players feel about it?
So when talking with Justin Morrow, Justin is a very well-educated black man, and he has an interesting experience. And I think not to jump from mid-2020 on purpose, but I kind of have to just temporarily just to touch on the story that I wrote in 2021 during Juneteenth. And when I talk about how I was able to profile the men behind Black Players for Change, and I had that conversation with Justin, I learned that he has an interesting experience. He's biracial, and his father's black. Not only his father's black, but his father was probably one of the most popular, well-known black policemen, just policemen in general in the city of Cleveland. And as you may know, historically, Cleveland has been a space where there's a lot of black excellence, a lot of black history, not just in the civil rights movement, but just throughout history. And knowing what it was like having a father who was of the police department, especially when we're talking about that story, right, and how the Black Players for Change came to be. And not only did we talk about that, but we talked about what his life was like as a well-educated black man playing college soccer at the University of Notre Dame. And so I think going back to 2020 and having not known that yet, but it now makes sense as to why Justin and the rest of the leadership for Black Players for Change were very pragmatic, but also very assertive when they needed to be and demanding, much just like the Black Student Task Force here and Black Male Alliance as well, is to be strategic in how they can make change, not only for themselves, but for the Black men and women to come on this campus. And so the tone of that story was not just about them. And again, I hate to push back to 2021, but at the end of that story that I wrote, that was Justin's point. He was saying, look, this is something that I'm very proud of. I was the head of this organization and have been, but this is more than just about me and my accomplishments. I'm hoping that this will remain in place for generations and generations to come, for the next generations of Black American soccer players.
And piggybacking off of that, more to the storytelling side, how can storytellers tell stories where subjects are presented well and not feel used just as props for words on pages? Because I feel like a lot of times, especially when dealing with topics like this, especially with social media, TikTok or whatever the case may be, Black History Month or Black Lives Matter or whatever the case may be can so easily be made a mockery of. How is it, as journalists and storytellers, how can we use these areas and be tender and empathetic, but also tell the truth?
Yeah, there is, look, in the Blackness, right? When we talk about Blackness, there is a sense. It's like a sense, or it's a sensory intelligence, right? To know when is the right time, but also to understand who is the right person to talk to and when is the right time to talk to them. The two stories that I wrote about Black Players for Change, those were stories that I had to work for. They didn't just come right when I wanted to tell them. I had to further introduce myself to players, to professional athletes, and to get to know them a little bit more, but also for them to get to know me. And I think in the grand scheme of soccer media, American soccer media, there have been plenty of times where, look, they could be pretty defensive about their experience, not just as a Black individual, but being in the sport of soccer, which for them is there's a slight difference between that and, let's say, basketball or football. And I think another thing to know is to say no when you want, right? If an editor pitches you a story and says, hey, first you need to smell the microaggression, first of all. I'm not playing. Number two is to recognize when there's an agenda at hand. And I think as a Black storyteller, again, regardless of what you're talking about, is to make sure that you want to tell that story and ask yourself why and what's your goal, right? And not just to do it just because somebody asked you to. I think we still own the pen we write with. And I think sometimes, especially as a younger writer, you get pressured into saying, okay, this might be the only chance to prove my relevance. You're way more relevant than what you think. And I was talking with someone about this last night, in the sense of belonging. One thing that I felt was your conscience and what you tell yourself and how you identify yourself, that the power is probably equivalent to 5 people. So if you tell yourself you're not that good, or you're only here because you're Black, and you're only in this newsroom because they need some representation, right? You're done. And you've basically casted off the talents, the ability to write with color, to paint a picture for those who weren't there at the scene, or to resonate with your sources, to cultivate sources. These are skills that in the real journalism field you need to get the next story. You need to break the news. I think it's important to believe in yourself and to realize that I think that, again, you own the pen that you write with.
That was great. You talk about the intersectionality between sports, culture, and our country and the world. What do you think are some reciprocal issues in society that you see being on the sidelines and being at these games and being in the press conferences and press boxes? What do you think are some like intersectionalities and juxtapositions that you see?
Yeah, so in soccer, there's this term that's used. It's called pace and power, right? There seems to be a bit of a relation depending on the sport. There's always seems to be something of that ilk. But in soccer, it's called pace and power, and what that essentially means is that this player is simply as good as he or she is because they're quick and they're more powerful than their opponent. And it ignores the technical ability, the intellectual prowess that they offer as a professional athlete. And I think that whether that be in the newsroom, whether that be in the press box, I think these are things that, although they are not overt offenses, I think they are still systemically in someone's mind. They are quick to write about how fast they were. They're quick to write about how powerful they were, how athletic they are. But they weren't, ready to write about how prepared they were for the game, how they knew what their opponent was going to do before they did it. But also, who are they off the field, right, off the court, wanting to be interested in that story and wanting to find more about them and to be able to relate to them. And I think those are issues that if you're not privy to that information, if you haven't lived it, then how can you tell that story to the best of its ability? And it sounds unfair to many storytellers, but I think that's just simply the value of being me, is understanding when I talk to Justin or when I talk to any black player. They don't have to be a member of Black Players for Change at the leadership level, but they can simply just be an athlete, and I can understand their plight, and I think they appreciate that, and I appreciate them.
All right, this is the last question I have for you. What are just some, maybe not final tips, but final going away points and that you have for the students here and students across campus, no matter what they're doing on campus or what they'll be graduating to, especially for post-graduation?
Yeah, the biggest sense of advice that I have is going back to those 3 C's, is build your confidence, know your character, and make your connections. And that's simply just being you, being aggressively you, right? I think that's important to say because I think we get, maybe if we don't see it, we're timid, or we might not be so assertive in how we can share with others who we are and what we want to do. Though I didn't see many who looked like me as a soccer reporter, I knew that I loved the game and I like to write. I like to write narratives. I like to tell the story that no one else is telling, but also to tell the enterprise story that may take a little while, but when it's told, it's well done and it's well worth it. And so whether you're in journalism, whether you're in business, whether you're in computer science, whether you're in sociology, right? It's important to show the world who you are and to own you, because no one else can be you.
I think that was beautiful. And with that, we'll say goodnight to you, Drake, and thank you very much. Once again, round of applause for Drake Hills. We'll do audio questions too.
Audio questions?
Audience, excuse me, audience.
Hi, Drake. Ryan Milano here. So when an editor comes to you with a story, you mentioned picking and choosing which stories sort of resonate to you. How do you sort of have that liberty in a newsroom as a up-and-coming writer?
Yeah, so just to be clear, what I meant by that was due to Khalil's question. Let's say if it is a story about like a black story, right, of a Black Players for Change story, I have the leverage and the liberty to know what is genuine, what is a story, and what is simply just a gimmick to get page views. So just wanted to clarify that. But let's just say generically speaking, I think it's important to be able to see the story yourself. And, sure that story may be pitched to you by the editor, but how would you go about attacking that story? What is your plan? What do you think that story is? And if you think that it's something that maybe isn't impactful, maybe there's a no, or maybe there's a, yeah, that's true, that sounds okay, but actually I've got a better story. What do you think about this? And maybe counter pitching your editor. I've done that plenty of times, especially in the soccer space. Now, for context, I'm the most knowledgeable soccer reporter in the region for the USA Today network. So there's a sense of expertise and confidence in knowing that, listen, The Athletic or the ESPN or Fox Soccer might have already told this story, or here's how that story may work better if I were to pitch it this way.
Do you feel that you yourself grows more where you can sort of counter pitch that and take your own angle where it gives you a little bit of uniqueness in that field?
Yeah, to an extent. I think that there's a brand that comes with the stories that you tell, right? I think there's a sense of identity where, some young man or young woman or old man or old woman will read you because they know who you are. They know the stories that you've told. So yeah, there's a sense of empowerment, a sense of growth, I think, not just professionally, but in my identity. And I think it's important to stick to your passions to the best you can. I mean, obviously, you're not going to be passionate and obsessed with every story that you do tell. Believe me, I'm a beat writer. I don't particularly care for covering all 34 games sometimes, but it's part of the job. But you appreciate it in the long run. And there are some stories that may be a little bit, I was like, let me just get this over with and file it. But I know in a week's time or 2 weeks or a month's time that I'm probably going to get to tell that story that I've been holding out on for the past several months. And it's going to mean a lot to me, but it's also going to mean a lot to my audience.
Hey, hello, Drake. My name's Aryan here on behalf of the MRC, the Men's Resource Center. Thank you for being here, first of all. Really grateful to share a room with you and to be affiliated with you in some small way. One of the things that struck me about your story, obviously your identity as a black man, but as a man also, and especially as you talk so much about the narrative about women's sports, whether it be about the NASCAR driver or the U.S. women's soccer team or the gymnastics program at Fisk. It seems that, I'm curious about how your identity as a man in particular relates to this work that you're doing and the sense of purpose and impact that you're bringing to this important work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. It really stems from, first of all, my identity as a member of my family. I'm again, as I mentioned earlier, both of my parents, but really starting with my mother, who has encouraged me. And I'm sitting here in front of you guys. I didn't mention this in my lecture, but I mean, the reality that I'm even at Oregon is because of her. I didn't start my application to Oregon; she did. I'm true story. I came home. I was a JUCO student at San Diego Mesa College. I came home, and my mom was working from home that day. And I see this big old computer screen with the University of Oregon letterhead on it. And she knew that University of Oregon was my dream school since I was in the 7th grade. I always loved the athletic culture here, but also the chance to experience something new, having already known what the South is like, and wasn't quite interested in going to school in the state of California. So I always loved Oregon, and my mom knew that. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be a graduate of the University of Oregon. And that became something that evolved. I grew up going to LA Sparks games and watching the WNBA. My favorite player was Teresa Witherspoon, playing for the New York Liberty. And even watching the U.S. men's national team, Shannon Box was one of the, and Brianna Scurry as well, but one of the very few black players of the U.S. women's national team. And so I've always appreciated the power of women, not just in sport, but women in general. And so having understood the plight of blackness, obviously there's a two-way street there. It's not just privy to the black men, but it's privy to black women as well. So I think not just in the stories I tell, but whether it be in social media, whether it be in my own community, I think it's important for me and means a lot to me to amplify black women in sports and just black women in general.
Other questions?
Thank you for an amazing presentation. I am from Tennessee, so I'm very proud that you are there. Considering that sports has been one of the first places that America integrated, and the Jackie Robinson kind of concept, are there higher expectations for you as a journalist than it is for journalists in general?
Wow. Expectations. I certainly believe in my path that I have a healthy burden, perhaps, to be able to represent not just the black players, but the black coaches, the people that I write about, but also, as I mentioned at the end of my final slide, is to be the bridge for a Weston McKinney or the current black women right now on the U.S. women's national team, the Midge Purce, the Mal Pughs, to be able to say, look, to be able to be the reason why that young black girl, that young black boy believes in themselves and believes that they belong. And I would hope that there are others out there that have the same healthy burden that they carry, whether that be in sports or also in music, in art, in academia, to be able to see those that are pioneers or simply just those who exist in that space and they do so as the only black representative. So I believe there's a healthy burden, yes, but only others can say what their expectations are. I don't want to sit here and think that I have higher expectations or more pressure than maybe my white or Latinx or Asian American counterparts, et cetera, et cetera. But I do believe that there's a healthy burden that I put on my shoulders to one day make it to the point where I have a voice that breaks state lines and perhaps national and international lines as well.
Other questions?
While sports were one of the first areas of American culture to become integrated, I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as well, that American sports audiences are, to put it generously, very resistant to increased diversity in a lot of ways, or different kinds of representation than what they're used to. And I was wondering if, in your work, how you've navigated the potential, potential disputes with the audience over stories that you've written, especially ones like the one that you mentioned about I've forgotten the name of it. But whenever you write
Black Players for
stories,
Change?
yeah,
Yeah.
whenever you write stories, elevating underrepresented voices, if you've ever had to deal with backlash from your readership, or how you've navigated that, if you have.
Yeah, that's an easy one. I don't see them. I simply just don't. I don't cast my eyes on things of the earth. I cast my things on things that are above, and that's important to realize, not only spiritually but also in my craft. And that's not something that's unique to my experience. I think there's multiple reasons why there'll be a lot of backlash, not just in sports but in politics. Right, we've seen that as well, and the divide, maybe the retrograde of where things are going politically in this country. But for me personally, I simply just don't see them.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Once, twice. Sold. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out.